Welcome back to the TimCo Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. Basically, this is a practice for what you'll be asked to do in a real job. In this lesson, we're going to call the API to get access to secured resources. Since we've not yet done this, we're going to set up a simple test and work out all the bugs. Then we can move on to actually doing real calls in the future. For those of you who are subscribed to my Patreon and at the $5 per month level or higher, head over to get today's source code. All right, that's going to give you a good copy to compare yours to. Just make sure you're still doing the work and not just using my copies. Doing the work, typing it out, trying it out is definitely going to help raise your ability to do this job. All right, let's head on over to Visual Studio. Now, in our WPF project, we've got the library, which we call the desktop UI.library, which really now is a misnomer. It's just a user interface library because we're also calling it from our Blazor project. And in here, we have the ability to do things like this, the product endpoint, where we can say, hey, get me all the products. However, this is a secured resource, meaning you have to be authenticated and you have to have the correct permissions in order to make this call. So we're going to call this in our portal just to try out and make sure we understand how these calls work and make sure we can actually make a call if we're logged in. And if we're not logged in, then we can't make that call. So let's go to our Verify Auth page. I use this page as our test for how to make these calls, because this Verify Auth page really is kind of a test bed, just verifying where our authentication is, verifying what roles we have. It's really a sample page for us. And if I do all my work in here, then when we go to production, if this page does not have just production ready stuff, I can just delete the page and no one has access to anything I've done. It can be a way to test certain things without having to redo everything or rip our test code back out. Now, the other way of doing this, and it's something that I also do, is you can do your work on a separate branch of your Git project. So if you want to try something out, try it on the separate branch. If it doesn't work, then you can roll it back. If it does work, great, you're in. But this is a little bit different in the fact that I'm going to want to keep some code. I'm going to want to throw other code away. And I think if I can contain all my throwaway code in the Verify Auth page, then this allows me to have the best of both worlds. So I'm going to bring in here, using an inject, I'm going to bring in the iProduct endpoint. Let's call it products. So these are the products you want to make a call for, and if we're authenticated. So only if we're authenticated, what I'm going to do is after my is authenticated equals true, it doesn't really matter where it is in here. I'm going to say, let's just say var data equals, I'm going to say products dot get all. And this should return back well, it's actually awaitable, so I have to await this, a list of product model. So await, and this should be a list of product model, just so we're clear on what it is. And then what I'll do is I'm going to do a for each, where I say for each p in data, p standing for product. I'll do a console write line and say p.description. Okay, this is a really hacky way of doing things just to get something to test. All right, and it's fine just to have something to test when we're trying things out. So what this will do is it will print out to the console in the browser the description of every product we find in our list. Now, if this were to work right out of the gate, then we'd see that in our console. Let's start this up and let's see how we do. I'm going to start the application. It's going to launch a few different browsers. Let's see, I think this is the one. Yep. So this is our browser. And if we go to, let's hit F12. Oops. F12. There we go. So I'm in here. We've got a couple of info messages. I'm going to hit Verify Auth. and it says the user is not authenticated. All right, so authorization failed. So we didn't even go to that section. We now go to the page doing a login. We're at the hello world. Let's go verify auth, and we get verify auth blank is authenticated, but these are all false, and we've got this unhandled exception. So the get products has a 401, which is an error that says that we're unauthorized. We're not authorized. So right down here, system exception unauthorized, saying, hey, you can't access this. This is a problem. Now, notice that it didn't pop anything up. It didn't go to our code. We're in debug mode and yet didn't go to a breakpoint anywhere. And that's because we're using WebAssembly. So Blazor WebAssembly is a little bit different than the rest of C# in the fact that it won't drop you out yet for unhandled exceptions. It just pops it up in the console. Now you do get this message at the bottom. It says an unhandled error has occurred. Hit reload to reload the page. But that's not going to help us. So we know that we're not authorized. Let's close this all down. And let's think through how can we become authorized. And actually, before I even do that, I think we need to do one other step, which is to wrap this right here. So I can do a surround with. I haven't done this in a while. Surround with, and we're going to wrap it with a try. So exception EX, and here I'm going to get rid of the throw. And I'll just say console write line EX dot message. Okay, just print out the message to the console. Let's run this again just to see that in fact it doesn't throw an unhandled exception anymore. It throws a handled exception that gets printed out to the console. So let's bring up F12. Notice I'm still logged in as Tim. I am Tim Corey. Verify auth. We get the exception, and now we just get the printed out unauthorized. But it does say Tim. I am Tim Corey is authenticated. We do have the roles properly being shown. So that at least gives us a better experience in the fact that we're not crashing our web page. Now let's close this out and let's go back to our code and talk about how we bring in some kind of authentication to our system. So in order to tell the API who we are, we have to pass that token. Now you may wonder, well, you're already logged in, so why is it not saying we're authorized? Well, an API is stateless, meaning it does not remember you from call to call. You have to tell it who you are. That's what the token is all about. You have to pass that bearer token in the header for every single call saying, this is who I am. It's going to verify that, and then it's going to say, oh yeah, you're Tim. Sure, go ahead, take the products. So we have to pass that in somewhere. Now in our WPF project, down here, we have our API helper, and in here we have authenticate. So you have a username and password. We get back the token. And once we have a token, we get that information. We also have the get logged in user info. And so part of that is we get the user info based upon that token. Well, we're not doing this. And notice that this right here sets up our API client, which is an HTTP client, where it clears out the request headers and it adds a right here as the authorization, the bearer token. So we want to do that for all of our calls. So we need to get the get logged in user info. We need to call that to say, hey, this is who we are, and add that to all of our calls for our library's API helper. So let's come up to our portal and look at our authentication, where we have our auth state provider. And in here, we have a few different areas. We have the get authentication state. This is what looks up initially and says, hey, what are you? It looks up the token, finds it in local storage. And then it says, add the authorization to our header. But that's for our HTTP client, not for our APIs. We also have this notify user authentication that happens, where we pass in the token, and then we say, okay, we've got a new authentication state, and we notify everyone, hey, the authentication state has changed. So I think what we need to do is in here where we have user authentication, whenever we get authentication, that we need to make some modifications so that we also tell our API client, hey, we've got some changes. So let's come up here and look at what we're bringing in. We're bringing in three things. We're bringing in the HTTP client, iLocal storage service, and iConfiguration. Let's bring in also our API helper. Actually, we want to bring in the iAPI helper. We'll call this API helper. And then we will add the field for that, the private field, private read-only field, iAPI helper, and so on. And then down here, we can start doing some work. Let's just move all this down, and let's put a try in here. We want to make sure we have a try catch, because there is a case where the system thinks we have a valid token because we have a token still. That token's expired. So if we don't have a try catch here, what will happen is if the token's expired but it thinks it's valid, it's going to try and use that token. The API is going to go, no, you're not authorized. And then it's going to crash. We want to make sure we have a wrap this in a try catch. But inside this try catch, sorry, bumped the scroll there. We're going to say await, and we actually need to change this then to async task. So we will await the API helper dot get logged in user info. That's the method we just looked at. Pass in the token, and that should, notice there's no return here. That's just a task that's all it returns. Because what that does is that changes the API client on the API or on the class library side of things, and it does the call to get users for information about the user. For example, their create date, email address, first name, ID, last name, and token. So all the good information is going to be stored then in our API helper for use with our other classes. So very important we call this to get all the information. And then we're already doing this authenticated user get new claim principle. So let's do this, because here's the deal. If this fails, the reason it's going to fail is because the token is invalid, which means we're not actually authenticated. Because right now it's saying, hey, you're authenticated, cool. And it's notifying of the authentication state. I want to take this out and put it up here because I don't want you to always say, hey, cool, you're authenticated. Here's all the roles and permissions you have if that token has expired. So we'll only do this if this passes, if it does not throw an exception. Now, this var auth state, we need to bring this up because the auth state, which is a task of authentication state, so task of authentication state, this needs to be outside of our try. Otherwise, if we have an exception, we can't then use that outside of the exception. So, or outside of the try. So auth state like that. So now we have this happy path, which is, hey, cool. If things work out and you're logged in, we're going to get the login information. Then we're going to set up your claims, and then we're going to notify everybody that we've got an authenticated user that just logged on. However, if we have an exception, first of all, just because we don't have a logging system in place, I'm going to log this out to the console. So console write line, the full exception. And then I'm going to say, let's grab, we need to grab the token information because I want to wipe out this token. I don't want to keep trying to use a bad token. So let's delete it. But in order to do that, I need to know how to talk to it, which right here. So this line right here will allow me to talk to it, and I can grab this line as well, just because I can then rewrite it. So we've got our token storage key, but now instead of doing a await get item, I'm going to say set item, and we're going to wipe out, let's get rid of the string here. We're going to wipe this out by saying empty string. Actually, you know what? Let's not even wipe it out because that's kind of imprecise. It still says there's a token there. Let's do Control J here and remove item async. So that way it removes the token entry entirely. It's not there. We don't have anything for our token anymore. This is if, again, we have an exception and we say, nope, there's a problem. That token's invalid. So if it's invalid, we're going to remove it. Now that we've removed it, I also need to create an auth state of some kind because of the fact that we have to pass something. In this case, we're going to pass in anonymous. So auth state equals task.fromResult anonymous. So this anonymous comes from right up here, right there. Authentication state, which anonymous, new authentication state, new claims principal, claims identity, it's all empty. So that's our anonymous object we can then use to say, hey, you are logged off. For example, right here, that's the same line of code. You're logged off. Well, you're logged off. Same code. So it clears out and says, hey, you're no longer logged in. Now the auth state, it has to have a task. So it's got to be an asynchronous call, but we already know the answer to it. So we just say task.fromResult. And so it takes the value, it wraps it in a task object that's already complete and that has the value of that anonymous entry. So that's why we do the task.fromResult. So with that, I think that we can call that good. So now we've got the happy path, hey, you're logged in. We've got the, hey, that token was invalid. And either way, we notify of authentication state changed. Notice it's not notify of authentication. It's of authentication state changed because that is a great name because it's going to allow us to say, hey, actually you're logged off after all, or that login failed or whatever. We had a problem there or it worked. Now there's one more thing that I think we need to address. And that is this notify user log out. So the reason why I say that is because we have up here this get token user info. That's what happens if we log in. We also have, we go over to our API helper. We have the get logged in user info. We also have log off user, which clears out those headers. So we need to do that somewhere. Now we do have this notify user log out, but let's look at the log out page real quick, which this says auth service log out. So let's go do a control F12 to go there. It's not going to go there. Excellent. Control F12 will work in C#. It's not working right now in our Razor pages. So what we need to do is go and find our authentication service. So we have a log out here. We have log in, we have log out, which this goes ahead and notifies the user log out. It sets the request header to null for our version of HTTP client, and it removes the local storage token. That's all great, but we have to do the log out for our API helper as well. I think I want to do that here because we're doing the call for it here as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, well, I want to change this to async task, but I need to check first how that's making this call. It's an async task log out, but I need to tweak this call a little bit. So I need to say async task, and then over here where we're calling it, I need to await that. That takes care of that problem. And then we also need to actually do something asynchronously, which would be that we say await the API client dot log off user, like so. Now we're logging off the user as well, which actually that's not even interesting. I thought that was asynchronous. It is not. So I guess that solves some problems there, which means I can take this off. I can set this back to void, and I can get rid of that. Whether or not that should be asynchronous, that's a good question. I'm going to leave it alone for now because of the fact that it's not hurting anything, and I don't think we're going to add more asynchronous calls in there. But it is something to consider: is do you want to make everything asynchronous? Also, we haven't done a good job of making sure we mark our calls as asynchronous methods. I guess when I say we, I mean me, because I'm the one writing the code. But since we didn't mark them as async, then we're not saying log off user async. We don't know that it's asynchronous, so we have to guess whether or not it is because we don't have anything marked as asynchronous. Up here, our get logged in user info is not marked as async. Therefore, we don't know that we have to await that. Except we mouse over it and it goes, oh, it's awaitable, or it yells at us in the IDE. Not the best of solutions. We need to probably go back through and do some cleanup there to mark those properly. Okay, I think we have everything. We're going to test all this though, because this is a lot. This is a lot of tweaking to try and get our calls in place. Remember, if it works, then we'll see in the console the descriptions for our products, which we only have, I believe, 2 products. We already have a failure. Excellent. So the error output list cannot await a void. Did I change the wrong thing there? Task logout. I think I changed the wrong thing. That's not good. Yeah, you probably yelled at me. So let's build this again and see what I changed. You succeeded. So let me go back and look at my error list and look at warnings. Right there. That's the one I removed. So I was looking at the wrong thing when I removed it. Now, also my error list, because this call is not awaited, notify, we need to await this call as well in our login. Okay, now let's rebuild the solution. Wait for it to complete. All completed. We have some messages, but no warnings or errors. Let's address the messages because it is good practice. And you've already established that we need to do this more often. Whoops. That one should not be read-only. All right. Object initialize can be simplified. Sure. Using statement can be simplified. How can it be simplified? Well, let's look here and actually go to simplify the using statement. So instead of having the whole thing wrapped, we can just have it using inline. And since this is the whole statement, we don't have to wait any longer for the using. I think we can go ahead and use the simpler using statement. Notice that rewrote some things there. But essentially what that's doing is instead of having one more layer of indent, it just says we're using this. And once you get to this curly brace now, you're going to properly dispose of this response. So that's fine. I'm good with that. Let's go to this right here. Again, simplify this using statement here. That's fine. So let's simplify that. Make field read only. Cool. Another using statement that can be simplified. Yes, it can. And make field read only. You may wonder why I'm going through so fast and changing these, because these are not things that are going to cause problems. Marking this as read-only is just a kind of a performance addition and also a safety check here. You don't forget to, you can't override this. Those kind of things aren't going to cause a negative impact on my application, but I'm still going to test it. Let's run this again. In my last lesson, we talked about the fact that when you open up new files, you're going to find new errors. Just address them as you go. So here we have, let's go to F12, bring our developer tools up. Let's clear the console, just so we have nothing in here. Go to verify auth, and it says unauthorized. Nope. So we still aren't authorized for some reason. Let me just log off, log back in. Just to be sure that that is an issue. Let's clear the console. Now look at that. So that was, it was saying, hey, you've got a problem here. You're not authorized, even though we were logged in, but it didn't properly clear out either, though we had a problem with our issue, or our token. So our token had an issue. It had timed out, but it wasn't telling us that. It was still giving us the exception we tried to use our token. So let's find out why. Let's go to our application. Let's go to our local storage, our auth token. I'm going to change this value here. I'm going to make this E into an A. What that will do is invalidate the token. Verify auth. It still verifies. Let's clear console. Let's go back to verify auth. Notice it still works, but that's because I haven't refreshed and retested that token. So now again, unauthorized, but we're not logging off. So we have this weird case where it's still saying, hey, you're authorized, but we're not logging the person off when we find out that no, it's a 401, they're not authorized after all. So there's still a bug here somewhere. I refresh. Maybe I'm gonna refresh. It's gonna crash on me, I think. I hit shift when I probably shouldn't have. When I hit refresh, it's a habit. Let's stop that and start it up again. Right now we got some kind of weird glitch going on. Okay, let's start this up again. We'll hit start. We'll see if this time we get our token says no. And it still says, welcome, Tim. I am Tim Corey. It's still saying, hey, you're good. So I don't think we're firing the proper event yet. So if we go to, let's hit F12 first, bring up our developer tools, go to console, clear the console, verify auth. Yep, we're not authorized, even though it says, hey, cool, you're authenticated, you got some roles. So it's not properly firing that code yet. So if we were to say log out, it fired that code. And if you go to verify auth, it says, hey, you're not authenticated, or authenticated. So it's firing that code, but it's not firing the code properly to check to make sure this is a valid token. So when we go here, this is a valid token, and notice it read the descriptions. So that's cool that that's working, but we need to make sure that it also doesn't work when it's not supposed to, and that it breaks properly. Now, changing the token here, it's not going to immediately cause a problem because we haven't done any kind of verification against that token, because we haven't logged off. So we're still using the proper token, the original started with an E, not an A. We haven't pulled this from local storage until we close the page. So once we close the page and start over, that's when I should pull it from local storage and say, hey, wait, this is a bad token, and log us off. But it's not doing that. It's still saying, hey, you're good. And when we go to here, we hit F12 and look at our console, we can see we get that 401 unauthorized. We've wrapped it in a try catch, but it's still giving us that error which is not what we want because that token is invalid. So let's find out why when we're starting up, we're not checking that token properly. Let's go over to our auth state provider, and we've got this notify user authentication, but let's see when this is triggered. Now, part of this is it's hard to see everything because of the fact that this is based upon the identity system. So it's not going to be as clear cut when things are called because sometimes they're buried inside of Microsoft's code. However, we have this being called, and this is called in here, which is the login event. The logout event, we're not calling the notify user authentication as well, which is fine because we're not actually we're notifying a user logout, and we've properly handled the clearing things out, clearing our token out. However, when we first log in, we're not calling this. So I think what we're going to do is going to grab this, and we're going to run this notify user authentication right away after we get the authentication state. So right here, I'm going to make that same call. I don't know why I'm doing this. And this right here is just token. So I'm going to make the call to notify user authentication to say, hey, when you first log in the system, log in is a bad word. When you first turn on the web page, go ahead and notify us if it says you're logged in. Okay? Because right here above this, we have the return anonymous if there's no token. But if there is a token, I want you to go ahead and notify us that there's an authentication state set up. So let's try this and see. Now remember that token is bad. I've modified it manually to be the incorrect value. So let's log in here and see what it does. And it says, welcome, Tim. I am Tim Corey. If we have a failed to load resource service respond of 401 unauthorized already. And that's at the get logged in user info. So it's firing that, which that should be right here. And then it should be that we are removing the token and we are setting us up as anonymous. Let's take a quick peek at, let's go back to our page here and go to our application. We have no token here. So that did work. We have no token. And if we were to close this page and restart it, it should be that it works. So it should be there's no person logged in here. Let's verify that's true. That's correct. So I have to manually log in now in order to, so that's logged in. We can verify if we hit F12, we'll see that we have a token. We'll see that we're printing out the descriptions. Let's go back to our token. Let's modify this again. We want to track down this error. It's always good to test all these weird scenarios to make sure that your system works the way it's intended to. So let's close this out. It should be that this notification of auth state change, which by the way, we can't put a breakpoint in here, they'll actually be caught because the fact the way Blazor WebAssembly works and when the debugger gets attached, you can't do an early access stuff. Okay, you have to kind of wait until things are completely up and running, and then you can have breakpoints be hit. So right here, we have to work a little bit with our kind of like gloves on trying to do fine manipulation. That's okay. We have other tools we can use to track down what's going on here. So we have this state change here where we are removing the token. We are changing the state, but notice this isn't a wait here. That should work just fine, but we need to make sure it actually is awaiting. And then we have a notification of state change. We don't actually have a log off, but we are saying, hey, return anonymous here. I'm wondering if I should rework this to put this call. This is just a thought here, but let's try it out because it's not as good to see the thoughts rather than just have me try to explain it. I'm going to move this up here. So now we're just notifying if the auth state is an authenticated user. Then down here, instead of doing this line right here, I'm going to comment that out. I'm going to say notify user log out. But I'm a little concerned that this doesn't do everything. If we have the logout page right here, we also have the auth service logout. That's something that we're not doing. So let's look at the auth service logout, which what that does, it removes the token. Okay, so we're already, we were doing that here, but let's just keep looking at it. We were also saying logout, which we are going to do right here. And then we also set our client to have that no authorization header. So there's three things that we're doing when I think we can do is do some tweaks here. First of all, in here, what I can do is I can move this code. I can cut this out. Let's just cut. And I can say move this down here, which means I do have to set this as async task. All right. So we'll have to address that in other calls. So like right here, we'll have to say await. But now I've cleared the token out. And what's the other thing I need to do in here is I need to set the client, which do we have access to that client? Yes, we do. So in here, I can also set the client to be null, which we can put that right here. I want to do everything before the notify of state change. That's not called client, it's called, I believe, HTTP client. This is where the same naming convention will help. So I've done everything now that we're doing in here. I have done in here. So in this logout, I can just change this like so, say await, like that. And then I have this one line of code saying, hey, go ahead and notify user logout. And this does everything instead of having stuff in both places. Because then I can also call it up here and know that everything will get done. So let's go ahead and call that a good test. Make sure that we're doing the proper logout. Let's start this up. And what should happen is that when we get that exception that the token is invalid, because we get a 401, then we log off the user. And it's not happening. So let's verify why. First of all, let's hit F12, look at our developer tools, go to console. We are getting a 401. Now you may wonder, well, Tim, why are you saying that a 401 means that you're not logged off, or you are logged off? Because maybe you're just not authorized. Well, no, everyone should be authorized to get the user info. That's getting the information on their first name, their last name, their email address, their ID, and their token. So those things, everyone should have access to do. If they don't, then there's a problem and we're saying, no, you're not actually logged in. So that's why I can say that with certainty, but we are getting that message. So it should be that they are logged off, right? We have the exception message saying unauthorized. So let's go now to our verify authentication page. And it says, hey, you're not authenticated. And oh, by the way, it changed the information up here to say email address and password and log in and register. So it just didn't listen to that event properly, or had that event properly fire to change this over to say, hey, they're logged off. The token's gone. So everything works except the fact it didn't refresh this. So let's turn off developer tools, close this down, and I'm going to go ahead and look at the login component. Actually, it's not even a login component because the login component just shows, hey, login. It's actually going to be, I believe, the main layout. We have authorized, not authorized. Aha. So the authorized view, we need to trigger this to say, hey, they're no longer authorized. So the issue is that the system isn't being told we're no longer authorized. It's being told, hey, you're still authorized, so therefore it puts the information here, and it's the right information. So there's something going on. If we look at the auth state provider, something is going on in here. Let's look through the process of what happens when we first load the application. So we first load the application, we get the authentication state asynchronously. Notice it's marked async. That's not my method, it's Microsoft's. They did it right. So we're getting the token here. Cool. So we get the token from local storage, which there is a token value there. Now it's the wrong one, but there is one there. So it's not going to null or white space, therefore we're not going to return anonymous. Then we're going to do the notify user authentication, passing in the token. We're going to try it out. If we have an exception here, then we're going to write that exception to the console. We're going to await the notify user log out, where we actually do the log out process. Okay. This is where we clear out the token. So we say remove the token from local storage. This is where we make sure that we set the auth state to be anonymous. We call the log off to clear out our HTTP client in our DLL. We call the set the authorization to null for our HTTP client, and we notify everybody, hey, the authentication state has changed. So now everyone will look and say, oh, hey, you're logged off, including what should be this authorized versus not authorized. However, if you go back up and look, that's not where we end this get authentication state async. Call it right here, we await it, but there's no return value and it's not crashing. Therefore, we keep going. Then we say default request header authorization equals new authorization bearer and pass in the token. Well, that token is blank, right? No, it's not. Here's why. We write it into a variable right here. We deleted it right here. Deleted the token itself, not the value in our string. Therefore, we pass in the bearer token to our headers and actually set our headers back to being saying that we're authorized to access. And then we return a new state that says, hey, we're good, we're logged in. So we pass in an actual token, which it then parses and gets information out of. Now, once we go to any other page, then we're going to run just this when we encounter any kind of issue. So what we need to do is figure out a way to stop right here and not go on to do these two things. So we need to say, hey, no, we've got a problem. We need to stop right here and have an anonymous return instead. Okay. So I think what we need to do is have a return type on notify user authentication. So we can say task of type bool. That's the simplest way of doing it. And now in here, what we can do is we can have a value here. Let's set up a value at the very top. It's called bool. Normally I'd say output, but that's not clear enough, I don't think. Is authenticated output equals false to begin with. Okay. And then what we'll do is we will say here it's true. And then here we don't have to change it at all because we have an exception and therefore we could not change it at all. I'm going to change it anyways. And here's why. Because right now this is unnecessary. However, if I put code after this line right here that then failed and said, oh, actually they're not author or authenticated, then it would still set that value to true. Therefore, I want to be explicit here and always set it to false. And then I'm going to return the is authenticated output. So that's why I'm doing both places like this. It's saying, we could do it another way. We could probably have, this is an unnecessary assignment. That's why it's yelling at me. So I don't have to put true or false here because I'm assigning a value in each place explicitly. I think that's good to do just to make sure that you're saying, yes, no matter what, we're going to set the value properly. So now I can come up here and say, bool is authenticated equals like this. And then if is authenticated equals false, return anonymous. Now, a couple things here. I could say, exclamation point here instead of equals false. Yes, that's true, or it's false, but it makes it harder to read. So I like to have the very explicit equals false. I could also just move this whole thing down into this spot, not have a variable at all, and just say await user notification authentication token is authenticated, or equals false. But I don't like to have all that crammed in one line because it makes it hard to debug. With this, it's easier to debug. So let's try this out. Remember, our token is and should be invalid, but it is there. So we'll verify that's the case. Well, we can't actually verify that that's the case. I'll do it again, just to make sure. Always test. And notice we're logged off. We're not authenticated. If we hit F12, go to our console, there's no error messages, but we are, in fact, logged off. So let's log in, just to be sure. And once this logs in, we'll hit F12. There's no error messages. Verify auth works. We do have those two descriptions being read. And now I can go over to our application. We can modify this token to have an A at the beginning, and we can close out the application. We can start it up again. And once it starts up, it should be that we're not logged in anymore. And that's the case. We're not logged in anymore. Now, if I were to log in, and once we're logged in, I close everything out, I start back up, wait for it to load up again, and once it does, I'll still be logged in. Okay, so I'm still logged in. The authentication information is still correct, and if I go to console, I still have those two descriptions being printed out. So we've now handled the idea of properly attaching a token to all of our calls. So really, the work that I actually want to do in this process is all on verify auth, where really all I want to do was make this call right here and verify that, yes, it was working. That's all I wanted to do. And it took some time because we had to make sure we attached the token properly to all of our calls and make sure we're clearing it out properly when it's no longer valid. And so with all of that, it took a little bit of time, but I think we've got it right now so that we can make any of the calls in our DLL. Remember, these are the same exact calls that we're using our WPF app to make. It's just that now we're also using those same calls in our Blazor WebAssembly app. So now we have two different applications, one web, one desktop. Both are using the same library, make the same calls with the same authentication and the same authorization levels, same roles, the whole 9 yards. So we're all set up now where we don't really need this code in here. In fact, I think I'm going to get rid of this code. So if you want to take a screenshot first of that, and if you wanted to play around, that's fine. But we don't need this code anymore. We know that it works. And now what we can do is we can get rid of this too. Now we can create a page that shows us all of our products and just say, hey, give me the products. And it's going to say, yes, you can do that, or you are not authorized to see that list, even if you are authenticated. That's where the authorization part comes in, but we're all set otherwise. All right. So that's all I wanted to do in this video, which actually came to be quite a longer video. This happens with authentication. Authentication is not a simple, clear, easy process. There's a lot to it for good reason. So it's going to take some time, but we now, I think, have gotten past all of the authentication issues. We can now work on things like authorization issues while we do the work of displaying products, having a shopping cart, and all the rest. So we can really mimic what we're doing inside of our WPF application while also adding those admin features we want to see as well, such as adding inventory and other things that we really need to get going so we can have this feel like a real full process instead of a pretend process. All right, so we're going to stop there for now. In the next lesson, we'll pick this up and start working on probably showing some products or showing some other data on the page, and then we'll get into inventory management and the rest. All right, thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking with it. If you have any questions or comments, post them down in the comments down below. And as always, I am Tim Corey.